Cool. Yep, we are live. Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome wherever you are in the world to this episode of Learning Pieces for Developers. Now, today, joined by a good friend of mine, Ben from Arcjet, and we're going to be geeking out on security, bot detection, rate limiting, attack protection, all this kind of cool stuff, and probably talking utter nonsense for a couple of hours because
more than likely.
more
I'd
than
be
likely.
disappointed if we didn't. In fact, I think we have both made promises online that we will be going off tangent, and who knows? Who knows where this session will take us?
Who knows? Might end up talking about whiskey, may end up talking about security. We just don't know. So, yeah, I guess, Ben, do you want to start off by introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Ben. I've been in developer relations now for about 6 years. I'm currently working at a company called Arcjet, and we specialize in middleware security for web applications. We kind of sit in the API backend area. And as Jim mentioned, we've got protections against like bot protection and common web vulnerabilities like the top 10 kind of things. We've got rate limiting, email validation. We're currently working on a redaction primitive as well. So you can redact your data before you send it to an LLM, for example. So all of these kind of things that we want to make easier for developers to make their applications secure without having to write it all themselves, basically.
Because this is the hard thing with security, isn't it? It's a lot of us developers, we don't know what we're doing.
Right.
Not to quote the meme of the dog on the piano or anything like that, but it's like that we don't know what we're doing.
It really is. And there's often this saying that developers don't care about security. I don't think that's the case. I think developers just don't have time for security. And that's been something I've seen for the last 25 years. I'm aging myself now, dating myself, and aging myself. We came from a perspective of security was almost like a feature. As you're developing code, you kind of have to remember to do the security part afterwards. And then we started thinking about it as being part of the feature that we're developing. So it's more as a process. Neither of those seem to really be working because there's still the situation where we have to deploy because either customers or the board or whoever are expecting these features to go out. And features are security is nothing without the feature, right? You can't write the security first and then put the feature in. You write the feature, and then once it's ready, everybody wants it. So we're always under time pressures, and whatever we can do to make our lives easier when it comes to securing our applications is always a good thing.
I guess it's not just the time pressure, but it's just a knowledge thing. It's as a developer, you've been asked to implement a feature. You don't necessarily think about the security implications of that feature, unless you've got a good product manager who understands security. Some things you will think about it. Okay, I need login. You're not going to roll your own login. You're not going to store a password with base 64 encryption. We've all read that Stack Overflow post about that.
Sure.
But you're not, for things like authentication, you're going to go and probably buy your own. It's fairly well established now with developers that you don't roll your own authentication. Still happens.
Sure.
Still happens, sure. But generally you don't. But everything else, you don't necessarily know. I mean, you mentioned data redaction. I used to work in the banking sector. And so in a bank, you are dealing with a lot of customer data, a lot of client data. And the number of times you'd have a developer database that has got live customer data in it. Obviously you can't access production, you can't trade on their behalf, but you've got all their personal information. You know the trades that are happening, and these are being exposed to developers who have not had the right compliance training to have access to this data. It is a huge problem. Mm-hmm. And so you'd end up with massive projects kicking off to look across the whole ecosystem, work out who is doing restores from production into development, and put in data redaction layers across that. But that's an afterthought. And so every time a new system is built, they don't bother to put that in as they're building it. It comes in at the end when the big order happens 2 years later.
Yep.
So yeah, so
it's too late already because the private data is already out there. It's already on the developer machines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it isn't like it's deployed to one database in a data center that you can quickly delete. It's a million copies. I have SQL Server running locally. I've just dumped the entire production database into it on my local machine, which I'm accessing from my laptop on the train on the way home or something. Mm-hmm. Which is scary. Cool. And so before we kind of dig more into this, these streams, obviously, we want them these are for you, the audience. We want these to be as interactive as you want them to be. So please jump in the chat, say hello, let us know where in the world you are. I always think it's fun when I'm streaming. I get folks from pretty much everywhere. I've had all time zones from India, where it's literally the middle of the night, all the way across Europe, Africa, into the US. So please let me know where in the world you are. Jump in with your questions. We'll make sure we focus on your questions first. Get chatty, have fun. To say this is for you. So please take advantage of the chat. We want to get to know you. We want to answer all your questions. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen, and then let's actually look at Arcjet. So there we go. I did drop this in the chat.
I recognize that page.
And again, you've seen this before, haven't you? I'm sure.
I have, yeah.
So as a developer, talk me through how Arcjet works, what I can do with it.
Sure. Right now, we've got a number. So we're mostly an SDK. Let's start at a bit of an architectural level. A lot of the talks that I give often go into technical deep dives because I think the developers want to know how things work under the hood. If you understand how things work in a black box, you're more likely to know when the right time is to use it, etc. So architecturally, we have 4 SDKs at the moment. We've got a Node.js, a Next.js, Bun, and Svelte.
Okay.
They are all very JavaScript heavy, as you probably noticed. We're working on a Python one at the moment. We've got Go. Like JavaScript is not the end game for us. It's just the starting point. We're currently in beta, although we are going to be going live pretty soon with a public release. The idea behind it is that the SDK includes a WASM that has a whole lot of the logic inside that provides the main primitives. So the primitives, as you can see there, bot detection, rate limiting, email validation, attack protection, and data redaction. So when you install the SDK, npm install or whatever your favorite package manager is, you bring that WASM and the adapter, I guess, that allows you to connect your application to this in middleware. So this is actually running inside your application, which has a number of advantages. But once it's running inside your application, you get these protections from WASM. There are certain things that we can't do in your applications. So for example, one of them is bot detection. We've got a huge list of IP addresses that are known bots. And that list is, I believe it's around about 100 meg. We don't want to be sending that down the pipe every time somebody's loading. Now, it runs on the server, not in the browser, but we still don't want that to be bundled up inside the WASM. So for certain things, we will go to our API to get further information. So if the WASM can block it early, it will. If it can't block it for whatever reason, then it goes to the API and says, do you have any reason to block it? And if not, then the request goes ahead. Same thing for rate limiting, email validation. A lot of it is, in fact, email validation, a lot of that is wrapped up in the WASM for privacy purposes. There are some occasions where the email address will go to our server. We'll do things like checking to see if the email address is not just a valid format, but is there a server somewhere that will accept email to that address, rather than just assuming that if it's formatted correctly, it's valid. So we'll go to that length as well. Data redaction we're doing just in WASM. We don't want your data. We only send headers at the moment. So with data redaction, we're going to be processing all of that within the SDK, so it doesn't even leave your application, which is, I mean, if you're trying to secure your PII from getting leaked, why would you send it to a third-party provider to check to see whether it's PII? Kind of defeats the point.
Yes,
so,
yes.
So
to be redacted before it goes to you, shouldn't it? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's the overall architecture. In terms of installing it, as I said, just an npm install, and then there's a couple of lines of configuration, and then we've got a function called protect that you call. You pass it in a certain number of parameters depending on what you're protecting or which of the primitives you want to use. And from that, you get a decision, basically, from the SDK of whether the request should be denied or allowed. And along with the deny will also come reasoning, so you can dive in and work out why as well.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. And so it's there as a WASM. So I guess for those who are watching not heard of WASM, that's WebAssembly. It's where you can compile code down into a form of bytecode that can be run by your browser. So it's fast. It's great because you can literally write WASM in any language. So, if you want to build a Rust application, for example, I've been dabbling in Rust. In fact, right next to me, right here, game development with Rust and WebAssembly.
There you go.
Not too far into that. I do enjoy Rust, but time. The book's here as my shame of you haven't done any more of game development with Rust. You need to start again. But what's cool about WASM is you can write in any language and it compiles down to something that runs very fast, kind of treating your browser a bit like a virtual machine. So if anyone's done Java development, when you compile your Java code, you actually compile it to bytecode that runs inside a JVM. WASM's the same idea. It compiles a kind of bytecode that runs inside your browser. And I guess things like Node on the server side are also going to run WASM as well. So you can run this both in the client on a website and on the server side. So if you're hosting a API in Node and you want to do things at the API layer, you're like a SaaS platform, for example, and you want to do the data redaction at the SaaS platform level rather than the customer side, you can implement that. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct. So in fact, the WASM does run on the server side, but it's your server side. It's not our server side.
Mm-hmm.
But the advantage with that is, as you say, it's one code base that can then be, it's not really cross-compiled. It's compiled into this object that can then be used by any other language that can talk to WASM.
Which is basically everything, really.
Basically. It's most often associated, I believe, with JavaScript applications because being WebAssembly, it's for the web. But technically, as long as you've got a connector to the WASM bundle object, then you can talk to it. But the advantage with that is that when it comes to doing the Python SDK, for example, we don't have to rewrite all of that logic in Python. And when it comes to then doing the Go SDK, we've got this single point of code that allows us to adapt and add features in one location, and then all of our SDKs get the benefit of that. So
Nice.
it's good. It's not just a good scale issue, a good scaling solution. It's also great for not having to repeat your work. I don't know about you. I've worked on projects in the past which have been done in multiple languages because it is for others to consume, and having to keep those all up to date is a pain. So let's try not to do that. Yeah,
I started out in developer advocacy with Xamarin, which is .NET for mobile devices. And the big upside to that was you write things once. I mean, yes, you had to do a few things a couple of times. You had to do any Android-specific bits, any iOS-specific bits, because obviously each platform is different. But the core of it, you'd write that once and you'd share it across everything. Same idea here. You've got the core in WASM because you're deploying most of your logic inside the SDK. This is not like a thin wrapper around an API. The core of the bulk of your logic lives in that one place, and that's downloaded by the client, as it were. By doing it in WASM, you've got that complete cross-platform solution because it runs anywhere that you can run some form of browser engine. Essentially, you can run anywhere. You can run Node, and then you just put a thin SDK on it in the language of choice that is optimized for that SDK. And away you go.
And in fact, what we've done for the JavaScript side of things is we have a JavaScript SDK and then what we've called, I don't know whether this would be standard naming, but we call them adapters. I guess it makes sense in most situations. Because if you look at the difference between Next.js and Svelte, for example, one of the things we need when the request to that protect method is called is the request headers. It's from that we can determine, for example, in rate limiting, we can use that to fingerprint the user to work out who's making the request. So you can fingerprint per user, or you can rate limit per user. Same for shield protection. We'll get information out of the headers that will allow us to determine whether or not it looks like a common web vulnerability attack or something like that. But the way that Svelte and Next.js store, handle, pass around that request object is different. And in fact, the format of that request object can also be different. There is a standard request type that's defined for browsers, and then you've got next request, which is the object that next applications use. They are compatible, interchangeable, but there are slight differences between the different stacks. So rather than having a different SDK per stack, Essentially, it is a different SDK, but it's the same WASM. And then it's just this little adapter in the middle that exposes to the front end the API to our SDK. So the protect call, the checking to see whether it's denied or accepted or approved or any of those kind of decision outputs. That API of how you interact with our SDK doesn't change. But inside there's an adapter that will translate for the particular framework that we're looking at to make sure that it works for that framework. So we've even gone one extra level of abstraction there.
So you've got the WASM core, you've got like the JavaScript wrapper around that, and then you've got very thin adapters for Next, Svelte, Node, whatever.
Right.
Around there. And then if you want to do Vue or I don't know, I mean, how many bajillion frameworks there are, if there was a demand for the next cool framework,
exactly.
Insane Carrot or Elephant Dung or whatever it's going to be called, you could.
I look forward to Elephant Dung becoming the web developer platform of choice.
I mean, if I knew JavaScript, I would create a framework called Elephant Dung just based off this, and that would be my next live stream. But I don't know JavaScript, and
point me to your Patreon when you're ready to start. I'm here for this.
This is gonna be one of those things, isn't it? Like when Dylan Beattie was joking about the Rockstar programming language in a pub once, and then now it's a thing.
Next minute is the thing. I know it's a problem when you share ideas. I think TED have something about ideas worth spreading. I think all ideas are worth spreading. The question is, are all of them worth implementing and executing on?
Yes.
I would argue the ridiculous ones, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
We need more fun in life.
Yeah. In fact, I'm gonna show you something. This is quite cool. So zip into pieces. And why is did I share the right thing? I said I need to share my screen. Share screen.
Share the browser.
I shared the window, not the screen. There we go. So I'm just going to add pieces here. This is cool, just because you asked about Rockstar. So I'm in pieces, using Gemini as my LLM of choice in this, and creates me a hello world program using the Rockstar programming language. Can't type.
As an aside with the can't type.
Gemini doesn't like it.
Oh no.
Let me try GPT-4o.
I'm finding I'm getting increasingly lazy when it comes to fixing typos, because most of the Gen AI tools, they understand exactly what you mean and they don't judge you.
Yes. Which is good when you're live streaming, because when someone's watching you can't type properly, can you?
Oh, absolutely. I actually had a tool once that would type the correct letter no matter which key I hit, just so that I could just like bash my keyboard literally while I'm talking, and the code would appear perfectly.
Nice.
Great.
Nice. There is a tool, a command line tool. I'm not going to mention the name on a live stream, but it does involve the F-bomb, where if you type something wrong, you can type F it, and it will actually work out what you meant and rerun the command for you with the correct command. Not going to look that up on a work live stream. Maybe
suitable for work live stream, obviously.
Yes, profanity, not good and all that. But yeah, so here's Hello World and the Rockstar programming language that Pieces just found for you. Midnight takes your heart and your soul. While your heart is as high as your soul, put your heart without your soul into your heart. Give back your heart. Desire is a love-struck lady killer. My world is nothing. Fire is ice. Hate is water. Until my world is desire. Build my world up. Shout my world. And that will output to Hello World.
That's fantastic. May I also congratulate you on possibly an unintentionally perfect rendition of how Dylan would read that out. I could hear his voice in yours.
I just need the hat.
You do.
If I had a hat, I could do it. So just a note for anyone who's watching, actually, just about this. So Rockstar, esoteric programming language invented by Dylan Beattie, a very nice chap from London. And he's actually going to be, if you're going to be at the Copenhagen Developers Festival, formerly known as NDC Copenhagen, in Copenhagen, obviously, he's doing the keynote there all about Rockstar program, how to be a Rockstar programmer, talking about the Rockstar programming language, esoteric programming languages, and all that. So Pieces will be there as well. I won't be there, unfortunately, but the other folks from Pieces are going to be there. So if you want a demo of how to create code using the Rockstar programming language, head to the Pieces booth, and they will generate some code for you in Pieces using the Rockstar programming language. So, complete aside. So I should probably start a new chat and say, create me a JavaScript library called Elephant Dung, but we will do that on another day. Okay, so
I don't know. I think if we spend like the next 35 minutes talking about the things we were planning to, maybe we can develop a language in the remaining hour.
We could try. We could spend 35 minutes talking about Arcjet and then an hour trying to create Elephant Dung.
What we could do is develop Elephant Dung as a language that is only accessible, like you don't compile it or run it locally. You send requests to a REST endpoint, which is protected by Arcjet.
So you can only compile it like one line a second or something because of the rate detection.
Well, so going back to one of the benefits of doing WASM and having the rate limiting in your code is that instead of, so if you compare it to a platform as a service security layer, where they can also do rate limiting and bot detection, all those kind of things, they're still valuable for different reasons. But one of the issues with rate limiting is that it's hard to know who's hitting the site. The platform, the network layer in rate detection doesn't have as much context about the current user as you do in your application. But the other thing is that typically the round trip for your request to be sent to another service to check whether or not it's a bot or it should be rate limited, that round trip can add about 100 milliseconds, whereas typically ours run at about 8. We have a sort of like a pseudo service level agreement of around 20 to 30 milliseconds. So if you use Arcjet to protect this REST endpoint that compiles your code one line at a time, then arguably faster than using a platform protection or a network layer protection.
It's an important consideration, isn't it? It is an important consideration.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess, should we just start with just a simple, just a very simple example of Arcjet before we delve into building out a framework?
Yes. I think the first thing you should do is click on that sign up for the beta.
That's probably a good idea, isn't it, really? So I can actually get access to everything.
It's good plan.
Right. Okay, let's sign up with Google. Right. Cool. Just checking you're not going to take control of my accounts.
Well, not yet.
Not yet.
That's
one
thing.
No. So one of the things I hate. Oh, sign up with Twitter, and you click on it, and like all it is just an auth. But we want permission to delete accounts, follow accounts, edit your messages. Like no.
Yeah, but just in case in the future we need it, we don't have to ask you again.
No, if you have to ask these permissions up front, I don't trust you. You're going to be reading my messages, aren't you? Yeah. Okay, site name. Oh, okay. So exhaust vent.
Yeah, we've got some examples there. So one of the things we realized is that some people were coming up and signing up for this to find out more about it, but they didn't really have a project in mind to apply it to. So we're like, well, if you don't have anything already, then asking for a site name is really confusing. Like, am I going to call it test one? So we thought we'd give people, just for a bit of fun, some suggestions, and there's a little link underneath you can click to actually use that suggestion if you would like.
Okay.
But you also see at the top there where it says personal. So we have a team model, so you can have multiple teams. And when you create your account for the first time, we thought, you know what, we're just going to create a team for you rather than having that extra step. So you've now got a personal team. If in the future you wanted to, you can create separate teams and then contain those different sites within those teams.
Nice.
So that's something you don't see up front, but it's something that we'll probably see a bit later as we start digging around.
Yeah, this is a very good feature because you think about the usual flows. Yeah, I'm a developer. I went to a conference. I saw you talk about Arcjet. Oh, I want to give this a try. I go back to work. I try it out. And then when I've shown in my testing that it's good, I will then want to roll out to a team level and get my whole team to use it. So I kind of add this project to the team as a demo and then
totally
so on and so on. Yeah. Okay. And you've got a couple of examples here, actually. You've got a live example.
We do.
Let's try your live example.
That one if you want.
Okay.
So you'll notice this is at example.arcjet.com, but there's also a Vercel deploy button. So if you want to, using their deploy feature, you can deploy this repository.
You can deposit the repository.
Hang on a minute. Obviously, I haven't had any coffee. I'll just get some more of this. You can deploy that directly into your own Vercel environment and play around with it if you wanted.
Okay, so let's just try that. I don't have a Vercel environment.
Oh, well, this will be an interesting flow.
Okay, so create a
I'm sure Vercel have tested this flow. So creating a new account and deploying something in one.
Okay, so Vercel would like to act on my behalf. You know what? What I'm going to do is, can I trust Vercel as a web deployment environment? Because that's always the question you have. So, oh, click this to deploy the service. Do I trust it? Do I trust it? So rather than read a lot of websites, if I ask pieces, what does GPT-4 say?
Yeah.
Vercel is a popular platform deploying web applications, particularly those built with frameworks like Next.js. Okay. Cost, vendor lock-in feature set, reliable and efficient choice. How many projects have been deployed to Vercel? Let's see if we can answer that. No data. Okay, I feel like I can probably trust it. I feel like it's not some fly-by-night, and it would be a bit ironic for a security company to point me to deploy something on an insecure platform.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I love that. Inferred trust.
Yes.
Very important.
Yes. Yeah, I trust you. You trust Arcjet. Arcjet trust Vercel. So, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon type trust.
That's it.
And it's going to act on my behalf, which it needs to do because it needs to deploy stuff, doesn't it? Yes. So that kind of makes sense. Okay, so okay. $404.
Wonderful.
Okay, let's try this again. There we go.
Yay.
That was better. Right, so I want to change the scope. Why has that got... Let's put it on my personal account. Oh, I need to auto-fill my thingy. That was weird. It came up with my work thing. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so create that. Arcjet is required. Only available on Pro Enterprise plans.
That's interesting. I'm going to make a note of that one.
Okay. Oh, we have Diogo Marcelo from Brazil joining us.
How are you doing, Diogo?
Hello. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Brazil. Don't get many folks from South America in general joining. So really cool to have you here. Yeah, we're geeking out on. Well, we're trying to geek out on Arcjet and security. We're hitting problems, which is half the fun.
Indeed.
So, great to have you with us. Okay, so I can't do that. I can't do that. So let's go back to the live example and do.
So I think what might be happening there is that Vercel does have an integration with Arcjet. So you can install it into your app, or you can create your site and kind of link it in to Vercel. You can also use it standalone. So what I generally do with my apps is I will start an application locally. I'll install Arcjet using npm install, and then I can deploy that to Vercel or to Netlify or to anywhere else. And that works fine. So I think what we're probably seeing here is that because it's been deployed to Vercel first, and I'm just making stuff up now, trying to work out in my head, like what do I imagine is going on in a black box scenario? I'm guessing what's happening is that because we're instructing Vercel to install this example app, it's then trying to grab that example app from GitHub and then integrate that with Arcjet through backend API calls. Whereas if you did it the other way around, and if you could even clone the example code and then implement it locally and then push that into Vercel, that would still work. So,
right.
But I have made a note of that because I'd like to find out more about why that happened. I haven't personally seen that one before, so.
Cool. Live testing. This is where you find all the things.
I love it. Right.
Yeah. And Bakesh asks, are there any upcoming features or enhancements that the Arcjet team is particularly excited about? I'm guessing the ability to add Arcjet to your Vercel app here is a feature, the upcoming feature they're excited about.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so we've got I will answer that question in a second, but just on the adding, I know it works because we have a HubSpot integration, I think, that goes into our Slack channel that tells us when people sign up, just so that we can get an idea of where people are coming from. And one of the flags is, did they come from a Vercel integration? The answer comes true as yes occasionally. So it is working. It just might require that Pro and Enterprise account.
Right.
So I would personally like to see whether we can make that available to anybody. But I don't actually know enough about the Vercel integration side of things to know whether that's possible at the moment. In terms of upcoming features, I mentioned at the top of the show the data redaction. I think that's going to be an exciting one. So that's currently it's mentioned there. It's not currently in any. No, I don't think it's currently in any of the beta versions we've released. That should be out, I'm guessing, in the next few weeks, maybe a month. But that one's really exciting because what it allows people to do. I mean, rate limiting is fun for sure. Attack protection is great, but I think when it, are you trying to distract me, sir?
No, I'm an incessant fiddler, and I was fiddling with my rather big and heavy wedding ring, and it fell off on the desk.
That's right. I do the same thing. I was fiddling with an elastic band before, and I went shooting off into the other side of the room, so I don't have that to play with anymore. So I will now also start fiddling with my ring and making unconsolable amounts of noise. But yeah, I mean, one of the things we're seeing a lot nowadays is this whole AI thing. I think apparently it's a fad. I don't know. Will it ever take off? Probably. But we're taking data and we're feeding it into AI. And one of the concerns is, well, what is that data we're feeding in? If it's coming from user-generated input, let's say, for example, we've got a chatbot and we want to send that to an LLM that's going to either be the response or suggest some kind of ways that we can do responses. If we just take that user data verbatim and pass it in, we're potentially sharing personally identifiable information, credit card information, all of these kind of things. We're potentially sharing that with a third-party system that we probably don't want to. Same for logging. Like, what are we logging? We probably want to make sure that what we put into our log files doesn't reveal more information than we actually need, and doesn't affect anybody's privacy, essentially. So being able to run this through a data redaction primitive within your application without it even leaving your application, I think that's really powerful. So I'm very excited about that one coming out.
Saying about passwords, one of the brokerages I was working at in Hong Kong, like over 10 years ago, I was nosing through the log files of the front end application, and I could see everyone's username and password, because it was just every single request that was made to the back end was logged with all the details there. And it's like, here is the global head of trading and his password. And let's be honest, traders are not the most tech savvy folks. So that was probably his password for absolutely everything. And we've got it in all these logs. So it's like, right, we have to do an emergency patch. We've got to review every single application, deploy a complete patched update, and then get everyone to update their passwords. Like, no, we can't do that. It looks terrible. So, not as terrible as having everyone's passwords there. So,
right.
Logs, people don't think about logs. So yeah, that's kind of a great use case for data redaction.
Totally.
Cool. And then Vakesh's got a follow-up question. Is what impact does implementing Arcjet security features have on application performance? Are there any trade-offs developers should be aware of?
Yeah, good question. So I think we kind of touched on the latency thing earlier. Whenever you add anything to your code, you're going to add latency, whether it's just because it takes a couple of extra milliseconds to do a calculation, or whether you're making an API call. Anything you add is going to add latency. One of the things with Arcjet is because we do everything in your application, that latency, including if a request needs to be made to our services, is typically around 10 milliseconds, often less. We kind of try to aim for a maximum of 20 to 30 milliseconds, which compared to the network layer protections we were talking about, which can often be around about 100 milliseconds, is certainly a vast improvement. So that's not to say that network layer protections are not valuable. There are certainly places where that is preferable. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve. But yeah, I mean, there's always trade-offs with adding something. But the counter trade-off is you have a more secure application, so that's probably a good thing. the slight extra delay, which for most people will be imperceptible, slight extra delay is probably going to be worth it compared to the benefit you get out of adding extra security layers to your applications.
Yeah. And as you're saying, 10 milliseconds, because it's running as WASM, it's running locally. You know, you get that benefit performance because you can't beat the speed of light. You know, it doesn't matter how fast you are.
If it only hits the WASM, so I mentioned at the beginning that it hits the WASM first, and the WASM has an opportunity to deny a request, or to say that an email is invalid, or to detect something that looks like an attack. It has an option to deny it, but it by itself cannot allow or say there is no problem. If the WASM thinks there's no problem, it'll then defer to the API, which does require a network request to our services, and our API will then do additional checks and then confirm or deny whether or not that request was valid. The 10 milliseconds is actually including the API. If the WASM denies early, it's typically 1 or 2 milliseconds, which is so fast. And the other thing we do is we're also deploying what we call our decision service, which is what you actually hit to make a decision if you need to hit our API. We're deploying that to as many places as possible so that it's as local as possible to your application. Remember, it's not the user hitting the API, it's your service, your backend code that's hitting the API. So we've actually deployed to Fly. So if you're hosting on Fly, you're actually not leaving their network to make that request. We've got services in multiple regions through, I believe, is AWS. And yeah, we're looking at adding more and more platform providers as well. So it's very important to us to keep that latency down, because we want your users to have an enjoyable experience. Obviously, we just want you to be more secure.
Yeah. So you've got Diego, for example, accessing from Brazil. They, a call is made to your application that's actually running in an AWS data center somewhere. When the call happens internally in your application, hits the WASM, 1 millisecond to say, yep, we think we're okay, but we need to make an API call. The API is then deployed to the same AWS data center. So again, it's fractions of milliseconds. So although you have that latency from Brazil to the AWS data center in the US, for example, that's your biggest latency. The actual on-service latency is going to be so low, you're not going to have a problem there, which I think kind of leads into Lewis's question.
And just to add on that point, we don't necessarily have it in all regions, but we have it in enough to keep that latency low. And we're monitoring that all the time.
I guess if you have lots of people accessing it from somewhere where you don't have something close by, it's just an easy deploy to another region on your side for the customers. So Lewis is asking, does the latency increase with scalability, or is it steady?
Good question. We're not noticing any changes in that latency. And I can't remember the exact statistic, but the other day we noticed that we were getting something like, I want to say it was 100 and something requests per second to one of our decision endpoints. We're in beta at the moment, haven't gone public yet. That'll happen within the next month or so. But noticing that as those have scaled, we haven't noticed any change in the latency. And obviously, if we do, we'll just deploy more.
But I guess the point where latency is going to be an issue with scale is the deployed WASM. Because if you've got this WASM deployed to your Vercel app, for example, if you're getting 1 million hits at that and you're running that on a not particularly powerful deployment, I don't know Vercel, I'm just assuming it's like all the other ones where you can choose the power of the engine that runs it and they're horizontal and vertical scaling yourself. You need to make sure that you scale horizontally or vertically or whatever, depending on how your application is built, to cope with all the hits on the on the WASM.
You have to deal with all those hits on your application anyway. So in many ways, you could say that you're actually going to get a better user experience by using our rate limiting, which means that because the rate limiting happens near the start of the request, if a user comes in and you can do rate limiting per user or even per the entire application on a service. There's flexibility to do that. So you can say if I'm getting, 1,000 requests a second, then you could rate limit everybody who comes to the service, which then means that you're cutting them off before the heavy part of your business logic actually runs, which allows those who aren't rate limited to get a better experience.
Yeah. So your beta customers or your cheap tier customers get rate limited, or your higher paid customers don't. Okay, so there is. So again, this comes down to how you are architecting your app to deal with scalability. If because there is a code being deployed to your app, you need to scale your app appropriately based off the number of users. It's no different whether it's code you wrote yourself.
Totally.
Yeah, it's just that I guess the difference is where you're not making an API call to do everything. You're using more CPU to run it. So you have to make sure you've got enough CPU capacity, but then you don't have the latency of that API call.
Correct.
Yeah.
But what we do is, because the API call is still required in order for us to track what's happening to your application, so that you've got a dashboard to go to and actually see what's happened. If the WASM inside the SDK that's running in your application denies a request based on whatever information it uses for that, you still want to see that in your dashboard. So what we do is asynchronously, we basically buffer the non-important data points, but we still make sure they get to our API.
Yeah, so there'd be no performance impact if you're logging it. You're not waiting for that log to finish. You say it's asynchronous,
Correct.
but you will eventually get that on your dashboard.
You can return back to your application, and the WASM will make sure the data gets back to our service, so that you can see. And typically, it happens so quickly that you wouldn't even notice that delay yourself if you're tracking the dashboard. But it does mean that from a user latency perspective, it doesn't hang. It's not waiting.
Okay, and then another question from Bakesh is, how does Arcjet's rate limiting feature work, and what options do developers have to customize it for their applications?
I think we might have to have a look at some code. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, is the docs a good place to?
Docs is a great place. I mean, you can just click on the getting started there, or directly into rate limiting. That works too. On the left-hand side, you can see rate limiting. Let's have a look at the concept. Is probably good. I would actually just go straight into. Let's have a look at the configuration tab, 2 down.
Configuration. Okay.
So we've got 3 different kinds of rate limiting: fixed window, sliding window, token bucket. Fixed window and sliding window are fairly similar. The idea with fixed window is you define a period of time, let's say 1 minute, and the fixed window starts when the first request comes in. And you might, and we'll get into the other things in a second, but you might say something like no more than 30 requests a minute. So from that first request, if within 60 seconds there are 30 requests, the next request will be denied. Very similar to that is a sliding window, which looks at the previous, and it's a rolling. Banging my microphone here. It's a rolling window.
You've gone quiet. Whatever you just did made you go quieter.
I banged my microphone too far away from my mouth.
There we go. That's better.
Excellent. So yeah, the sliding window is very similar in that it looks at the previous minute, or whatever you define, for 30 seconds. The behavior changes ever so slightly. So for example, if we're on a fixed window and I made a request right now, and then I waited for 55 seconds, let's say I've got 30 requests per minute, that means that in the last 5 seconds, I can still make another 29 requests. And then 5 seconds later, I get a whole new 30. So I can technically make 59 requests now within the next 6 seconds. And maybe that's the way you want to operate it. Maybe you want like a fixed window. Sliding window is what happened during the last 60 seconds. So I make a request now, then in 60 seconds time, that drops off. If towards the end of that minute, I make those other 29 requests, then 1 second later, those 29 requests still sit in the window, and they will for the next 54 seconds. So that is, in my opinion, probably a slightly more frequently desirable way of doing rate limiting. I'm sure there are reasons for both, but typically I will employ a sliding window when I'm rate limiting my API endpoints, because I want, on average, during a certain amount of time, for there to be this many requests. I don't want that opportunity for within 6 seconds for there to be double number of requests because of that, where that fixed window ends and the next one starts. And then token bucket is fun. So this aligns very similarly to the way that, and one of the reasons we brought it in is because it's similar to how LLM APIs charge. Anything where you're consuming different amounts of, where you get different costs for the different kinds of requests you make to a third party. Say, for example, I have an application, I've got a chatbot in the corner, and it connects to an AI, and I know that it's going to cost me so many dollars per X number of requests, and I want to manage that cost. So what I can do is say, per person, I want to make sure that no more than a certain number of tokens are consumed in a certain amount of time, and I'm going to top that up every interval. So imagine a physical bucket that's got a capacity for 40 coins, and every time I make a request for a text result, it takes 1 coin out. Every time I make a request to the LLM and it wants to generate an image, that costs more to me, so I'm going to take 5 tokens out. So that means technically I can generate 8 images or 40 text responses, but then every minute I'm going to top it up with an extra 10 coins. So you start off with 40, so you can do a lot of you kind of front loading all of the conversation, and then every minute you're adding an extra 10 coins for an extra bit of, so you're kind of drip feeding them extra allowance for using your chatbot. Now, if nobody asks any questions and you still got 40 tokens a minute later, then you add another 10 tokens, it's still 40 tokens. So that's the cap. Then you've got a refill rate, which is the 10, and then you've got an interval, which is the 1 minute. And then when you make a request, you actually define the request time. When you're saying, protect my app, tell me whether or not the person's rate limited. At that point, you say, give me a response of whether or not this request should be rate limited based on the fact that I want to remove this number of coins. So that happens at the request time. So a little bit more intricate, but very powerful when you want that variable, almost cost control style of rate limiting. It can apply to non-cost control as well, but yeah.
I was going to say, because that is literally cost control, isn't it? You think about these SaaS platforms where you have a free tier where you can make 10 requests a day. You have a subscription where you can make 1,000 requests a day, and you have pay as you go and things like that. This is literally implementing that payment
with the
model.
advantage that you can also define how much each request costs in terms of tokens. Now, if you're using a service that just said, look, 10 a day and that's it, you could use the sliding window, or you could use the fixed window for that.
Yeah.
But if you have dynamic cost based on the request type, then token bucket comes in useful.
Nice. Because yeah, I mean,
I've also be cost based on CPU usage. It doesn't have to be financial cost. It can be how much time is this going to take for me to process, and I want to cut down the number of intensive things that I do with my CPU.
I guess, or time based as well. You know, it's like the whole. It used to be cheaper to run your wash machine and tumble dryer at night because electricity was cheaper. Same kind of idea. Right. If you have something that's cheaper for different times of the day,
you
can surge pricing.
Now, within your app, you could say, okay, well, if it's within a certain time period, then I'm going to use a different token number for my request. If you scroll down a little, this one's the fun one, characteristics. So this might be more about what Bakesh was asking in terms of, maybe not. I mean, it's another customization option. This is where you define the characteristics of the client that's making the request. So in most cases, that'll be the actual user. But like, what do we know about the browser and the user in terms of fingerprinting who it is that's making the request so that we know how to rate limit? So by default, if you don't provide anything, it's going to use the IP address. Yep. Yes, one IP does not correlate to one person, but it's a corollary that we use in the absence of any other data. You can specify, there's a couple of examples here, as you can see, you can specify things out of the headers, out of the cookies. One thing that can be useful, and we were talking before about how different rate limits could apply to different people based on their subscription type, is you could have a subscription type as a rate limit, or a user ID rather. So if you log in and you're user 1 and I log in and I'm user 2, and user 1 has a subscription of enterprise and user 2 has a subscription of basic, then each of those will get different rate limiting types, but we're not defining that yet. We want to track those separately. So by defining in here user ID as the characteristic, it means that within Arcjet's table of rate limit data, so how many times, like the counter for the rate limit, if it was based on IP address, it would say, okay, this IP address has hit 7 times. And here are the timestamps of when that's happened, so it can work out whether or not the next request should be rate limited. You could do the characteristic as this user ID has requested 7 times, or you could have it as people from a certain country have hit it a certain number of times. So depending on how you want to break down and group the rate limit, you could even put in there that the characteristic is true, which would then be a count for any hit to the website. And that would be a good way of doing, look, I know that I have the ability to make 1,000 requests to this service. Therefore, for characteristic true, i.e. any request to the website, I want a maximum of 1,000 requests per day. And that will apply to any request that comes into the system at all.
Okay, so if I'm testing my own app that I've built and I'm using like an LLM backend, for example, and I don't want to, I just want to use the free tier of the LLM while I just test out my app in beta, I can say limit this to 1,000 calls a day, because that way, if it goes higher than that, I have to start paying. So limit to 1,000 calls a day. That's it.
And we've seen this in the news repeatedly, especially this year. It's happened like 4 or 5 times that I've seen a headline for surprise costs where somebody's received a $120,000 bill because their site went viral on Hacker News and they were on a free tier, but excess had to be paid for. And they get the surprise bill and they're like, what just happened? So if you can put rate limiting in before that happens, then you can control surprise cost, not just anticipated cost.
Yeah. And then I guess this is one of those ones where it's going to go to the WASM.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the WASM can deny it, because the WASM's been counting the number of calls, it will deny it. But then also it will go to the Arcjet API as well, because you may end up, if you've scaled horizontally, you may end up hitting different endpoints internally, hitting different instances of the WASM, so that you don't want this to count up to 500 and then you end up hitting this one here and the count is back to 0. So if it's denied the WASM, allow you block straight away. If it's not, it goes to a central API for approval, because that way you're going to handle the scaling thing.
Correct. That's exactly a good point. And I see here Bakesh also followed up with express rate limit versus Arcjet rate limit. One of the advantages, as you've just pointed out, is that this scales horizontally. It even scales across different applications. So you could, for example, have 2 different applications that both hit a certain endpoint in different ways. Maybe you've got a web app and a mobile app, but the user ID is going to be the same when you're logged in. So you're now able to protect no matter where the request's from. You're able to protect, and also no matter where your application sits. It could sit across multiple regions, could be horizontally scaled. You get that central source of truth rather than having to manage that yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess when it says Express, I'm assuming that's like Express.js, the middleware.
I assume so. Yes.
But I'm just trying to let me jump into pieces and just ask. Okay. So there is an let it finish. These LLMs are very wordy sometimes. Yes, Express.js does support rate limiting. Doesn't come with built-in, but there's a middleware you can use. So Express rate limit. So Bakesh, I guess that's kind of what you're talking about. So if you put rate limiting, so here you go. It's like some code sample here that's got a rate limit with a window.
Yep.
100 in this 15-minute window.
So this would work, right? So this would work within the context of this running app. But as soon as it's running somewhere else, it wouldn't have context of the rate limits hit in other places. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And Samba asks, great explanation. Just one question. As an AI ML developer myself, is this free? How easy is it to integrate with projects LLM APIs? Could you possibly give a brief idea on how to do that? So I guess first question, is it free?
Yes. So one of the things that's very important to us is if we're here trying to protect your application, in some ways, there's general security stuff, but rate limiting especially, if we're trying to protect you against attacks and cost overruns, we don't want to be charging you for that. Like that seems not ideal. Obviously, we do need to make money. We're a startup at the moment. As I've mentioned, we're in beta and we're going public quite soon. But at some point, we're going to need to make money because there's only so far that you can go without having a sustainable business model. So one of the plans we have is to introduce, so I mentioned quite a bit earlier, the idea of teams. So we have team functionality. We don't currently have a UI for managing teams, but it's all supported in the back end. So that's something that's coming soon. With that team management, we're probably going to have, as part of the free tier, like a certain number of people that you can have in a team. But if you want to go over that, that'll be an enterprise feature. We're looking at compliance, regulatory reporting, those kind of things that you might need for your organization. If that's something you need, then there will be an enterprise feature. So there will be an enterprise tier. But the features that you see today, in fact, if you in that docs, if you scroll down to the bottom on the left-hand side in the menu, there is a pricing page. So as it says there, current features available today will be unmetered and free to use. So that's our goal, and our CEO is very strong on that point. We want people to be able to use this and secure their apps without having to worry about cost.
So this is kind of one of the standard models a lot of startups are doing, which is the basic thing is free, but then in an enterprise where you need single sign-on or audit trails or team things or massive amounts of scale, the enterprises have the budget, so they hand over the big bag of cash, and that means that the hobbyists and general users can do it for free because they're kind of subsidized by the enterprises who need all these extra features.
That's it. And technically, it doesn't even have to be the hobbyists. If you have a startup idea and it takes off and you don't need the enterprise features, it's still free.
Yeah. And this is great. I mean, I know we're talking a bit in we had a number of discussions about developer relations, and kind of to grow, when we think about the top of the funnel, to kind of grow a project, you need a free tier because people aren't going to pay to try something out.
Right.
So, Sambhav obviously is like, oh, I'm interested in this. So if this was, great, hand over your credit card, it's very unlikely people are going to try it out so much. So
totally.
So how easy to integrate with projects?
You should try it out.
Yes. Yeah. So Sambhav joined one of our open source calls the other day, did some cool, showing off some very cool things they've been working on. So Sambhav, maybe you can build an app with this and show it off on one of our open source calls. That would be awesome.
And on the docs page, and I'll paste it into the chat as well, we do have a Discord channel, which is where we do our support and stuff. So if you've got any questions at any time, I'm hanging out in there most of the time.
I'm gonna drop that in as well. So if you're watching this on Ben's YouTube, you would have seen the Discord link there. I've just dropped in for the other channels.
Sweet. Thank you.
As well. And so the last part of Sambhav's question is, could you possibly give a brief idea of how easy is to integrate with projects? Could you possibly give a brief idea of how to do that? Should we build an app with rate limiting?
I think we should. Just in case Sambhav doesn't have time to stick around, because it could, at the rate we're going and diversions, it could take like 10-15 minutes. The TLDR of this is that once you've installed the npm module, you, at the very least, the basic would be to instantiate Arcjet, pass it some configuration options, and then you call a protect method on the Arcjet object. And then from that, you get a decision response, which tells you yes or no. So technically, you can get it done in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And in terms of integrating with LLM APIs, presumably you have an API that talks to an LLM. You just wrap it into that API endpoint. So before you even talk to your LLM, you're making sure that the rate limit has happened and bot detection has happened and all those kind of things. So you don't even hit your LLM endpoint.
So you put this TLDR. This is like the middleware that sits there. So the API call comes in, hits this middleware first, and then if that approves it, then it goes through.
The rest of your code runs. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm going to quickly show off a feature of pieces, which I'm not sure if you've seen this before, Ben. I'm going to go here. I'm going to turn live context on. Summarize the pricing for Arcjet that I was just reading about in my browser. In fact, now summarize the rate limiting for Arcjet. So here's a summary of the docs we were just reading.
Nice.
So if you're not seeing this in pieces, pieces literally watches what you're doing in the active windows that you're doing it. You can turn it off if you're doing anything that's private. But if you turn it on your development machine, it watches what you're doing in the active windows, just the active windows. And then you can ask it for a summary of what you've been doing.
Presumably it stores all of that locally. So even if there was private, it's not going to get leaked? Or does that go to a...
All stored locally. It's all processed
Sweet.
locally. We capture screenshots. We do OCR to capture text, delete the screenshot straight away, and then build vector embeddings that, all encrypted locally, all handled locally. The only thing that leaves my machine is the embeddings that it thinks are relevant that it needs to send to the LLM. And you know what? I could go on device. I could choose an on-device LLM, and nothing would leave my machine. I could literally turn my Wi-Fi off. Not going to. Streaming doesn't work if you turn your Wi-Fi off.
It doesn't? You don't have any carrier pigeons left?
No.
Oh,
You joke. What is the RFC for internet over carrier pigeons?
I believe it's avian carrier.
There we go.
Yeah.
Transmission of IP datagrams over avian carriers. There we go. RFC.
They didn't want to pigeonhole pigeons. Any avian carrier.
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if that includes butterflies. I mean, technically they're not avian, but they're still airborne carriers. I guess it probably doesn't then.
The advantage of like a pigeon is pigeons know where to start from and go to, so you can use pigeons for that communication. With a butterfly, you've no idea whether it's going to get there. Butterfly's a bit more UDP rather than TCP.
I was going to say it's both UDP, but it's also got a very low TTL because they only live for about a day, don't they? So if you're going to send it to the other side of the country, might not be the best option.
No, not going to work. The big advantage of the avian networks is actually it's actually very high throughput. It says low throughput here, but can be high throughput. It's on the news a fair few years ago. Someone had terrible internet through BT, British Telecom, UK telecom company, and to prove it was rubbish, they uploaded a load of pictures onto an SD card, attached it to a pigeon, and were able to send it over pigeon to a friend faster than they could email the pictures through their home broadband.
Fantastic.
So because you can obviously get like a 1 terabyte SD card that's this big,
right?
Tie that to a few of those to a pigeon, you can get 3 terabytes sent pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Over pigeons.
I'm gonna have to invest in pigeons again.
It's the future. You know, I've never seen the AWS thing where they send a whole big truck but you put your racks and racks of hard drives in there, and then they will then drive that to their data center and unload it. You know, pigeons would be much more environmentally friendly.
Absolutely.
So this is why we did warn you at the start. Who knows what we're going to be talking about in this conversation? Let's try and implement rate limiting. Let's do this. So go to rate limiting. I don't know JavaScript, Ben. So should I bun, next, node, or svelte?
I reckon you should. I don't know. Do the audience have an opinion?
Anyone got any
Give
thoughts?
Give a second to respond. If not, I would probably go with next. I mean, that's my framework of choice usually.
Okay.
But there you go. We've got a video for this one if you wanted. But
anyone else who's watching, if you've got thoughts on whether we should do bun, next, node, or svelte, jump in the chat. And
we do also have some example apps that you can download if you wanted. If you scroll down on the left-hand side in the menu, there's an examples area. And that'll actually take you to our GitHub repository. So this is actually the repository for all of our SDKs. But inside there, we've got examples. We could pull down like the Next.js 14 app, the RL, second one down. So RL for rate limiting. That would be a basic startup. So if you wanted to clone this entire repository locally.
Okay, let's just clone that. And then open that in VS Code. I probably don't want to open that in VS Code.
No, that's fine. So first thing to do in this, stay in the current directory for starters, and just do an npm install.
Okay.
Because some of the examples, some of the examples actually refer to the SDK in this repository as opposed to from npm, just so it's always using the latest version. So we'll just make sure that everything is installed there. And then we can go into the examples. Where was it? 14 after Earl. Nice and easy to say.
After all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of
It's
those.
taking a bit. Are your pigeons asleep again?
I think my pigeons are asleep. My internet's been pretty rubbish recently, but obviously streaming seems to be fine.
I was going to say, I'm glad the stream's held up.
Yeah. There we go. That's going. Yeah, the whole RL thing. It's, do you call it rate limit, which makes the name very long and you can't see it, or do you call it RL
Maybe.
and people are like,
exactly?
Is it? What does RL mean? It's kind of a tough choice.
I mean, even a couple of months into I've been here for 4 months now, going on 5, I think. And even a couple of months ago, I still hadn't twigged what the RL stood for. Then suddenly I realized.
It wouldn't be obvious to me. I was looking for something called rate limit because you got validate email,
right?
Permit.
See, maybe I should rename that to validate to rate limit, because we've got validate email. I'm sure rate limit is shorter than that.
RATE-LIMIT. Yep, 4 letters shorter. Okay. This is free. Oh, code.
You're already in code.
Yeah, but I was reloading it.
Okay.
Haven't you seen that?
So does it replace the window?
Yeah. So when you do, obviously, code dot opens the current folder in code, and code dot -R means reopen the current window.
R is replace. I get it.
Yeah.
I use code dot all the time. I often just open a terminal, go to the directory I want, and then open code from there. But all right, let's do another npm install. So we're actually getting the example modules.
Lots of npm installing.
All the npm installs. And then while that's going, oops, done. Let's jump into the app directory and into page.ts. And let's, okay, so this is just the main. So let's have a look in the API directory, because of course it protects backend systems. And if you jump into Arcjet and then route, we can see in here at the top, we're pulling in Arcjet from Arcjet next. Don't know why it doesn't know what that is.
Oh, that's a spelling mistake. That's all. It knows what it is. It's just a spelling mistakes. You know what? Let me.
Okay. I see.
Let me go into.
So we need to add Arcjet to all the dictionaries around the world.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll just disable that. Disable that briefly. There we go.
There we go.
No, I write a lot of documentation.
So
yeah. Fair enough. I won't do so much documentation. I need a spell check because some things I can't spell. Some things I can spell, but you Americans like to spell them differently. So I have to.
Don't always say you Americans. I'm about as British as you are.
Yes, that is true. That is true. Yeah. Apologies for implying you're American.
As an aside, I was strongly encouraged to set my work laptop up with US American spelling so that all our documentation can be US American, and it still makes me jump inside when I get the red squiggly. There we go. Red squiggly line under words that I'm pretty sure are spelled correctly, and then I remember that it's different. Anyway.
Yes, remove all the U's and add Z's instead of S's.
Correct.
Cool.
Right, so you can see you were pulling that in. We're using a fixed window here. So we're defining this in the route at the top. If we had multiple things we want to protect, we could also put it in. Next.js has a way of implementing middleware code using middleware.js. So we could also put it in that way, and then that would protect ostensibly everything. Although in there you could also do checks to say, hey, if it's this directory or if it's this kind of request, then add protection. So you can still do it selectively, but have it in one place. But for the example, we've just got it pasted directly into the route, this file. So we're pulling out the Arcjet key from our environment. We're defining one rule, fixed window. You can define the mode to be live or dry run. If you do dry run, then in the code, if you scroll down a little, in the get function there, you'll see we do an await aj.protect. That's basically making a request to protect our application. And from that will be a response of some sort. If you, at the moment, we've got that in live. So if the rate limit is hit, then decision.isDenied will be true, because it's the rate limit's been hit. If you change the mode to dry run, then decision denied will come back false, but you will still see the error in the dashboard. So there's a great way of trying stuff out and seeing what would happen in development or production without actually affecting the application. So you can do this dry run test first, make sure you're happy with the configuration, and then you can make it live.
Cool. So you want to test, is this an appropriate window? Then you try it with dry run, look in your logs. Okay, the fixed window is not working because we get bursts.
Yep.
So we want the sliding window. You can kind of try and just the logs. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So Bakesh asks an interesting question. What happens if the Arcjet API is unavailable? Because obviously you're making a request to the WASM.
Yep.
If the WASM doesn't deny it straight away, you are then making a request out through to the Arcjet API. So what does it do? Does it just fail?
So we have a standard timeout of, I think it's 500 milliseconds. You can define that yourself, but generally 500 milliseconds is fine because most of the time it's going to be upright. If it fails, the SDK will fail open. So it's never going to block a request unless it's absolutely certain because the API is being able to confirm it, or the WASM can block it directly.
Right.
So if it's unavailable, your application will still function. We're not going to stop anybody. What you can do, if you want, is you can change that failover to be closed. So if the API fails and the WASM can't make a determination, the default can be to deny. So that's a choice you have. But by default, we won't deny unless we get an absolute deny from the WASM or a deny from the API.
Cool. So the API is unavailable by default. Everything just gets approved.
Yes.
But you can configure that, because I guess that's one way to hack someone is if you can take out Arcjet first, then you can then you can take out the site that uses it.
Totally.
Okay. And then Bakesh also asked, do we need to use Redis with Arcjet for rate limiting, or does Arcjet manage state on its own? So basically the state.
Right. We do it all for you. So that's the beauty of it, is all you have to do is install the npm module, write this code. Obviously, you need to create an account and get an API key as well, and you're done. Everything gets managed. And the advantage is because we manage that state, again, going back to the previous conversation about horizontal scaling, no matter where this application sits, you're going to be getting the best response times because we're managing all of that for you.
And that's been managed both in the WASM and at the API level, so that if you end up hitting multiple horizontally scaled instances, if the WASM can't deny you because you haven't hit that rate limit yet on that one instance, it'll then go to the API, which acts as that state management across all of your individual stores. Yeah. So yeah, Bakesh, nothing you need to do. It just happens.
Happens magically.
Magically. We like magic.
Auto magic.
Auto
magic, as they say.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so to test this out, I need a key.
Yep. So if you jump back into...
What I'm going to do is I'm going to hide my screen. Well, before I do, I need to work out where to put it. So I need to take I've got this env.local example.
Yep.
I'm going to take a copy of that and just call it .env. And this is where my key is going to go. So I'm just going to hide my screen. Let's be a bit secure about this.
Although, if you wanted to, you could show people and then just delete the site, and then the key gets destroyed, and then people can see where it's coming from.
That's probably a good idea, actually, there, because I can show how we create a key. So let's do this. So I'm in Arcjet. I've already signed up.
Yeah, if you jump back into that third tab there.
Here we go. We'll call this exhaust port rather than exhaust vent, because if you need to take out the Death Star.
Absolutely.
Everything's exhaust port. I don't know if you know this, but I do like Star Wars.
I couldn't tell. I don't know what in your background might have given that away. You might also be able to tell that we are rather inspired by space-related terminology, but using exhaust port was probably somewhat close to copyright something. I won't say the full word in case that gets pulled up by people who like to troll these things. So a lot of our naming is tangentially related to things we all know and love.
Because Arcjet is actually an engine of some description, isn't it? So if I go to new chat, what is Arcjet? Yeah, electric propulsion system used primarily in spacecraft. Chemical and electric propulsion. So now, because one note about pieces, because pieces designed for developers, we actually have system prompts that say this is developers. So which is why we get a description of Arcjet. It's got an arc discharge, gas expansion, all the stuff you need.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's how to write some code for an Arcjet system. Because obviously this is for developers. So as a developer, if you're asking about Arcjets, maybe you want to do something.
So what I'm hearing is that I can use pieces to start my own competitor to a certain large space company.
For the software side, yes.
I'll just get pieces to write it all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. We can't help with the hardware, but the software side we can.
Can I write code that will program a 3D printer to create the hardware?
That's a good question. Can you create code to, in fact, that creates an STL file for a rocket?
Just start small, why don't you? There we go. I love it. As an aside, and totally relevant to this, my wife's currently working on a startup, and we were talking to Claude yesterday about kind of things you'd want to mention while going out and seeking funding and those kind of things. And of course, the AIs can't create presentations at the moment. They'll give you a text representation of what they would recommend and per slide and some stylistic things. So I said, write using reveal.js code to represent this. And it created a full reveal.js slideshow for her. It was great. So if totally irrelevant to this conversation, if you're trying to get, well, it's actually not totally irrelevant because it's exactly what we're doing with the rocket. If you want an LLM to generate something that LLMs can't currently generate, try and work out whether it's possible to represent what you wanted to draw in text or to create in text. I think it was also Claude, or might have been ChatGPT, one of the two. I gave it a full spec of like a multi-page MVP of an application that I want to start running, to create. And I said, create this as a Next.js app and provide me the zip file of the application. And it did. And I downloaded the zip file, I extracted it, and it ran.
Wow.
That's crazy what you can do now.
Uh-huh. That is cool. And I think one cool thing about pieces here is the fact that we have this choice of different LLMs. So some people find Claude, for example, is much more effective. Some people say Gemini is because you need the big context window. Just having that ability to ask the question, get back a result, grab, not happy, change LLM, and just rerun the same question.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Sambav asked, did I hear an STL for a rocket?
Yes, you did.
So yes. You've got OpenSCAD.
Of course, what else would you come to this live stream for?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this to pieces, and I'm going to. So here it is in pieces. Saved it. It doesn't know what type it is because we don't. It's not a language type we support. We've got a few tags added to it, and then I'm going to go and share this, and I'm going to generate a gist. Let's generate a gist for this because I like gists. Give this a second to run, and this should generate a gist, and I've dropped the link to the gist in the chat, so you can run this in OpenSCAD. There we go. Let's copy that. Is this private or public? I never remember how you configure all that, but well. Let me drop in the chat. There you go, Sambav. Here's a gist for run something in OpenSCAD to create a rocket STL file that you can print. And you know
That's
what?
publicly accessible. I can confirm.
Yeah. Cool.
And for anybody on my stream, there's that link again.
So maybe I'll try and 3D print this and post on the internet the end result that comes out of this.
I demand a time lapse of the actual print.
I don't have a camera set up for doing that, and I've got a resin printer.
That sounds like a you print. That sounds like a you problem.
It is a me problem, but I have a resin printer as well, so you don't get the nice build up from the bottom. You get the thing dipping in and out. So maybe I'll work something out. I mean, I do have a Raspberry Pi or 20 with cameras.
Sounds like you have a solution. I'm looking forward to the video.
Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure. Right. So let's call something source support. This is why it takes more than 5 minutes to create anything.
This is why I did say it could take 10, 15 minutes. I was wrong. It's more like 20.
And the rest. And here's my key.
Yes.
So let me copy my key, and I will drop my key in. I can't window today. There we go. Drop my key in there.
There we go.
There we go. And I guess if someone steals my key, it's free, so it's not going to cost me anything.
Right. And the worst that happens, we get log file entries. So I don't remember making that request.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got this 1 minute window allowing one request.
So type npm run dev.
Okay, run dev.
And that should start for you. Localhost port 3000 there.
Yeah, it was downloading an SWC package. Okay, so let's copy that. Paste that in here. Okay, this is my page.
Yep. So
and we've got a fixed window of 1 minute with a maximum request.
Right. So, but that's protecting the API endpoint. So if you look up there, we've got app/API/Arcjet. So in this particular case, you need to go to localhost/Arcjet /API/Arcjet.
So where do I? So that's the Arcjet thing. This is a get, and then
so if you look at the path, we've got app API Arcjet root.ts.
Okay.
So what Next.js is going to do is expose that as localhost port 3000 /API/Arcjet.
Right. Gotcha. So that's how Next works. So if I go /API, because this is a GET request, I can do it in my browser. Arcjet. We get a hello world. Request. And I do it again.
Refresh.
Right.
Limited. So if you jump back into the third tab now.
The third tab here,
back into your Arcjet dashboard, you'll see those requests have already come through. In fact, it's even picked up the first 3 requests as well, because that is hitting Arcjet. It didn't have any rules associated with it. And then the first request to the Arcjet API endpoint was allowed, and then the second one was rate limited.
Nice.
If you click on that rate limited line, it'll even open up a extra information that gives you, if you scroll down a bit, you can see that it was denied, and you can see the reason.
Rate limit,
because of the rate limit. It gives you that information.
Okay, that's cool. Now, so you mentioned it picked up the slash one. So that would be something in Next. So that's just something in Next.js that manages that.
Yeah, that would be in page.tsx. That's the main website. So I'm wondering what in there would have caused that to make a request. I don't see it off the top of my head.
There's no Arcjet in this page.
Let me pull up code on my machine. I'll just have a look at that code and see if I can work out where that came from.
Middleware.
Oh, you found it?
Yeah, because in the middleware, we've got Arcjet passing the middleware.
Yep. So in this one here, you can see that so the way Next.js works with middleware is we've got a matcher there. So basically it's saying match any request that starts with a slash, which is every request. So you could in there just put in /API, and then it wouldn't run this for the homepage anymore. Right.
So I don't need to restart it. It's doing the
correct. Yeah.
Smart thing.
To just reload.
So fine. I go back here and just go to the homepage. Whatever.
Nothing.
Reload this.
That'll automatically reload. So that's the latest data already.
So there's nothing there.
See, that hasn't hit.
But then if I go to /API/Arcjet, it's been more than 60 seconds, so it's allowed. Go back here. There's Arcjet allowed. Go here. 2 me limits. Failed. Nice.
Mm,
Nice.
nice and easy.
That's pretty easy. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my API, and then I'm going to take all this code, and I'm going to go pieces, save current selection to pieces. So what that's going to do, for those who've not seen this in pieces, is there it is there, Arcjet request denied with fixed window rate limit. I've just renamed it as well. So we have this thing where we use an on-device processing to name it, and then you can choose whether you also then want to send that off to a Cloud LLM for refining all the metadata. It's kind of a choice you have. And in here, I've got this, and it's given me all the annotations for it. Some tags like Arcjet. So if I wanted to search for anything to do with Arcjet, that's all there. So
that's very cool.
Which is very, very, very cool. So that's there. And then I can use this later if I want to add this to another application that I'm building.
Right. I
can copy the code from here. In fact, you know what? Let's gonna edit this code and let's optimize it for readability. Oh, that looks like a bug.
It's returned the
that's from Markdown
instead of the
Markdown.
Code.
Ooh.
Well, if you just remove the first and the last lines, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's any more readable now than it was. It was quite readable before, wasn't it?
It was. There was a lot of inline extra lines within the Arcjet initialization. Get your key site from blah, blah, blah has been moved to the end of the key line. So it's more compact. It's probably easier to read the actual code.
So let's say
the comments are still there.
Yeah.
Which is always the question, like, depending on who your target reader is, are you more verbose with comments, or do you let the code stand for itself?
Well, this has got comments in there, inline comments here and there and here. If I go back to the if I go back here, you had no comments in your get function.
That's true.
Now we have comments.
That's very cool.
I mean, obviously, some of these comments are, questionably useful. If request is denied, return their response. Well, if it's just denied, it's the whole your code needs to be readable. It's comments that tell you what the code does is less useful than comments that tell why it does it. But this one's quite nice. Status 429, set status code to 429, too many requests. So that if you're wondering what a 429 is, a 429 means too many requests. So that's a useful comment because that explains the why of the 429. So cool.
I actually sometimes do the reverse when I'm writing responses and I can't remember the code that I want to use. Is I will write in status colon, pause for a second, have no idea what number I want to do, and I'll do / start a comment, and I'll say status code for access denied is, and then whichever coding assistant I'm using at the time will complete it. So then the comment's complete, and then I can copy the number from the comment into the code. That's a fun little tip there. If you're stuck and you would have to search for something, just get the LLM to auto-complete a comment.
Yep, that is true. I mean, I could do that same in the Copilot chat here. What is the HTTP response code for too many requests? 429.
Nice.
And there's an example using Express to return 429. What is the HTTP response code for I am a teapot?
I knew that one was coming.
It's the best response code, 418. I'm a teapot.
It is the best.
Yeah.
So what is the const teapot is true. Okay. Replace with actual logic if needed. So here's one for you, Jim. What is the logic for working out if you're a teapot if you are running Express?
Well, I guess that depends on your actual use case. So the very first webcam was set up to monitor a coffee pot because the engineers were annoyed with going down to the coffee pot, finding it empty, and then having to brew coffee.
Yep.
Like, this is daft. It gives you a chance to have a break or coffee brews, but they didn't like that. So that's the very first one. So I guess if you had some form of hot beverage monitoring system that was monitoring coffee, tea, things like that, then you would, when you make your API request, you would put the beverage thing that you're monitoring. And if you said your coffee status with ID equals 4 and 4 was a teapot, you would then correctly get an I'm a teapot response back as the error. You have to obviously hit /T status ID equals 4. So that would be a correct case for it. The problem then is if you do T status, but you request for the ID of a coffee pot, there is no I'm a coffee pot response, HTTP response code. So this only works if you request the coffee status when it is actually a teapot.
Which is a hugely politically incorrect thing to do, to assume that all developers drink coffee.
Yes. I mean, the fact that you've got coffee, I've got coffee, we are not an entire sampling of everybody.
No, but we are 100% sampling of the current people on this screen.
Yes.
So that's statistically relevant enough for me.
Except I do drink tea some of the time. I'm coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon kind of person.
Yes.
If this was later in the day, I'd have a mug of green tea probably. That's just one of the nice things I used to get when I worked in Hong Kong. I worked for a brokerage there, and we had. Now, apologies for the very sexist term, but this is like a typical thing in the UK, like 60s and 70s, was a tea lady.
Yes.
Someone who'd come around and bring you tea. And we actually used to have this on the trading floor at this brokerage I was working for. So you get in the morning, say good morning to the tea lady, and she would have your mug ready. In my case, I used to drink jasmine tea. So she'd have the jasmine tea in the mug, boiling water, sit on my desk. And then all throughout the day, she'd be coming around just topping up everyone's tea all throughout the day. It was like a really nice corporate perk to have someone to constantly make you tea. It's kind of necessary because in Hong Kong, the stock market opens at 9, shuts at 12 for lunch, then opens at 1 and shuts again at 4. And in that time, the markets don't stop. So if you're trading, you cannot leave your desk. So it'll be,
that's understandable.
So you couldn't go and get a drink if you wanted to because you are there constantly trading. The downside is when one consumes tea, there are reasons one might want to leave their
desk. Rid of that tea.
Yes. So as soon as the closing bell rang at 12, it was literally a fight for the bathrooms. Yeah. But I digress. So yes, complete tangent. But yes, there is a use case for I'm a teapot. I guess question for the audience: who's a tea drinker? Who's a coffee drinker? So who has a need for 418, and who has a need for us to invent a new status called for I'm a coffee pot? I guess thinking tea is a very British thing. Maybe we have some British RFCs. Like instead of if you're having issues with cookies, we'd have like a biscuit not found. Response code instead of a cookie.
Interesting. I think we should start a petition to rename all cookies to biscuits.
I think we should.
Yeah.
I think we should. Biscuits are much nicer.
Question. If I make coffee in a teapot, it's still a teapot, but I'm after coffee. So I'm a teapot would still return valid for me wanting to get a coffee. Are we hitting a typing issue now?
We're also hitting a culturally inappropriate issue because if you made coffee in a teapot, then there will be a lot of very angry British people writing scathing letters to the private eye. Dear sir, my tea tastes of coffee because this Ben chap made coffee in my teapot. How do we get this stopped?
Maybe that's the real reason I moved to the Midwest.
You left because you were being hounded out of your town because you made coffee in a teapot.
That's right. The truth is out there now.
Next, you'll be telling me that you've been making tea by putting milk in a cup, then a tea bag, then boiling water on top.
What's wrong with that?
Right, ending the stream now. Okay. So we looked at rate limiting. And there's actually, I'm going to go back to the code. It's actually quite simple, isn't it? This rate limiting thing. As you say, it's just this protect method. So if you wanted to add other features.
So one thing we could do is rate limit by user ID. So let's not actually do user login or anything, because that's who's got time for that?
Yeah.
I mean, especially at our speed. How about before that line, after line 22, for the decision, let's just define a const called user ID and set it to 1. And then up in the configuration where it says limiting by IP.source as the default, let's uncomment that line and change IP.source to user ID. And now what we need to do is provide, and you'll see that protect down on line 24 now has a red squiggly line, because we have all sorts of magic inside TypeScripty checks that are actually contextually aware of the way that you're using Arcjet. So it now knows, as you can see there, we need a user ID. So as a second parameter after request, if you open braces for an object.
Okay, let's pass an object in.
And then just pass in user ID. Yep. So JavaScript is nice in that that user ID is actually shorthand for user ID : user ID. But in this case, what we're doing is we're passing the value of user ID, which is 1, in against the key of user ID, which Protect is now going to use as the characteristic because we've defined that as a characteristic. So now every time you hit the rate limiting, instead of using your IP address, it's going to use your user ID. So this now means that if you hit this application from your laptop, which might be connected to your office network, and then from your phone, which is connected to a cell tower, they've got different IPs. But if you made a request from one, then the second request from the other would be rate limited. Whereas the current version we have deployed, which is based on IP address, would give you 1 request each.
Okay. So you know what? I'm just going to undo all this and let's actually try that. So if I go to here, so localhost is not going to work. So what is? Well, I don't even know what my machine name is. That's
well, one thing you could do if you have it installed is use ngrok.
I could, yeah, that's ngrok localhost 3000.
So ngrok space http.
That's it.
And then just 3000. You don't need the localhost part.
Oh, I don't need the localhost, just 3000.
Yep. That's it.
Nope.
Error.
Authentication.
You need to log in. Looks like you had a temporary account or something.
I've got an ngrok. It's got ngrok set up on a Raspberry Pi yesterday. So let me just hide my screen. Let me just get like ngrok working. And then there we go. Okay, that is now working. So we add that back to the stage, and it's given us this forwarding address here. So if I go here, I'm going to here, visit site, that's fine, /API/Arcjet, help like a spell, message hello world, 2 limits, copy that. Now I'm going to go to my phone, I'm going to go to my web browser.
While you're doing that, do you want to jump into the third tab on your desktop so we can see the request come in?
Okay, so that's the one we got when we failed. Go. No, I got rate limited straight away. So I guess because I'm using the same Wi-Fi.
Yep.
But if I take Wi-Fi off, turn my Wi-Fi off, connect over 5G, I got message, hello world.
And we got an allow. If you refresh again, then that should be rate limited.
That's rate limited. Okay. So that's proven it using the IP address. But if we did the same thing, did it off, so we're saying about doing it over there by user ID.
Yep.
we're always going to be user ID 1 now.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go here, that's going to say hello world.
Yep.
And then I'm going to do that again, rate limited. And then from my phone, do that again, and I'm rate limited.
Excellent. Now what we should do
user
is waffle for around about a minute.
and then try again.
And then what we do is make one request from your phone. And then we'll see that that one works. And then immediately make a request from your laptop. And we should see that that one fails. So you don't get a single request after the first request. Theoretically, cross fingers, that should work.
That should work.
5 seconds after 41, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I don't have seconds showing on my clock, but actually it looks like we're about 15 seconds away.
Oh, so close.
It's,
so close.
It's the final countdown. Assuming you and I have the same seconds on and they're the same on the server and all of these things.
I mean, they're all synced up, so they should be all the same. So if I now...
We're just over now, so we waited another couple of seconds just for... Like now should work, I'm guessing.
Hello world from my phone.
Come through, and we can see it came through
right. Go back here.
Rate limiting. There we go. We've got per user rate limiting no matter where you're connecting from.
Cool. So again, different idea that if we don't have a user and we want to rate limit a person, IP address is kind of a good first place to start.
Right. And in the case of guest users, you will never have a user ID. So that is...
Yes.
And there are other things you could do as well. You could investigate other headers. You could do it by if you wanted to set a cookie, you could set a random cookie ID and rate limit on the cookie ID, which would still be more unique than IP address. So there are various different ways you can do it. But a default of IP address is not a terrible way.
Yeah. Because with the cookie, yes, if you save the cookie, and that will still be one browser, so I could potentially jump to a second browser that doesn't have the same cookie saved inside the browser storage, and just try again.
Although if you don't have a user account, then we wouldn't be able to know across devices anyway.
Yeah.
But using a cookie, if it was a concern, would alleviate the issue of, like for example, you just on the same Wi-Fi, you had the same IP address. Now imagine if that was an office environment and it was you and somebody else in the office that you don't even know.
Yeah.
If your actions would affect their rate limit. So using something like a randomized, cryptographically generated random number as a cookie ID would then mean that your browser would have a different identity to the other person in the same office that shares an IP address with you.
Okay, so is there a way? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ask Copilot. How can I get the user ID? I could spell user ID query param from this request. What is going on? Oh, there we go. Cool. So here's some code here to get a user ID. So what I'm going to do is grab this code. I'm just going to hide pieces because zoomed in things are hard. Come back here, pieces. So we have a small bug in pieces that copying inline isn't working so well. So I go here. Oh, it's got all the code I need, actually. Let's get rid of this get function.
I like how pieces even added in typecasting for the user ID in the protectable. Just to make sure it's actually a number.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Pretty good. So if you put the user ID as rubbish, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do user ID equals 0. This needs to be a let, is that right? Oh, that's a string. This is what it comes through. It's a string. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we can get user ID equals from the params
Mhm.
in here. So make this change. So what I do, if I go here, Arcjet question mark user ID equals 1, hello world, too many rates requests, user ID equals 2. Still got limited.
Interesting. User ID request.
So if I go to the logs,
So if you look at the extra, that'll give you
user ID 2.
So
there we go.
User ID 2.
Extra user ID 2, user ID 1. So rate limited user ID 2.
Hmm.
So that's weird because we're setting the characteristic as user ID.
Yep. And then we're setting that, and it's definitely going through as 2.
Yeah.
I might have to investigate that one.
Because if I go here and then just try that again, user ID equals 3. Okay, that worked. 3 doesn't work. 4, no. Because there's definitely user ID I'm passing, and that is coming through to here.
Interesting. I will add that to my list of things to check.
I wonder. It's not something daft like it's not liking it because it's expecting a string, is it?
It shouldn't be. It expects any kind of data, really.
5 hello world. 5 too many requests. 6 too many requests. No, okay.
All right,
we found another bug.
Thanks. We did.
Yay!
Fun times.
Fun times. Cool. Anshul XYZ says, are these videos archived somewhere like YouTube? Yes, they are. So youtube.com/getpieces. You'll see right now we are live, and this will become obviously a video in here. So Anshul, I see you're on Twitch. We do stream to Twitch and YouTube, so the stuff's always on YouTube. So just dropped a link there in the chat, so you can catch up with this later. If you missed the first part of this, you can catch up with all the fun things around teapots and biscuits, things like that.
Don't want to miss out on that.
No. Cool. Okay, so we found a bug. It's fine.
Do you want to add a really? So this is like one of the things I've heard from people is, I love it, but I don't know like how I would define rate limiting at first. This is something we would need to work out a strategy for within our applications. All makes sense. Like you need to have a strategy for rate limiting.
Yeah.
Should we do something really easy that anybody can do?
Yeah.
After line 18, stick another line in there and just type in shield. And that should auto-complete. And in fact, if you do the... Oh, did it pull it in at the top as an import?
Yeah,
it did. So it's pulled that in automatically. And then there's only one option. Mode is live.
So do I need to do a thingy here?
Yep.
Mode live.
There you go. Hit save.
Okay, so automatically saves because auto save. I
will
will just say this: if no one's seen this before, auto save in the file menu. If you've not come across this, this is your friend.
I do.
Amazing how people never come across that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so now you've got web attack protection done. That's all you had to do.
Okay, when you say web attack protection, I'm going to go to your docs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to your docs. Where are the docs?
Hiding somewhere. There we go.
There we go. Get started. Shield. And then what I'm going to do is lots of writing Lots of writing. Lots of writing. I'm going to scroll through this writing as if I'm reading it, but we all know that we don't read.
No,
we don't read. This is it's got
But if you
wax in
scroll
it.
through it, I think I know what you might be doing next.
Yes. You know what? I can't be bothered to read. New chat, live context on. Summarize the Arcjet shield I was just reading in my browser. Security solution designed for developers to integrate security information into applications without compromising usability. Give me more details based off what I was just reading in my. There we go. That's kind of more terse, isn't it? Designed for developers, primary goal is to integrate security information applications without compromising usability. Solution emphasizes sensitivity change across the application, means it can detect and respond to changes in the application environment or behavior that might indicate a security threat. And Arcjet Shield allows developers to build applications with security in mind from the ground up. Okay. Cool. Does Arcjet Shield cover the OWASP top 10? What I can do is let me just edit that question. Based on the documentation I was just reading. You need to be very, very specific with these LLMs. You can actually say based on what I was just doing.
Yeah.
Nope, nothing about the OWASP top 10. I thought it did.
It does. I think maybe we found a bug in pieces. Or probably more likely the LLM that's conflating.
Yeah, maybe it didn't capture it.
I was going to say, how often does pieces take a screenshot? Because it might have been that you scrolled past before it even grabbed it.
I mean, it should do every second or so. I think it's like every second that does it. So maybe
you're probably scrolling a bit fast. But for most people who don't just scroll down for the purposes of pieces picking it up, who are actually skim reading it, it would probably be at a speed that pieces is going to pick it up.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing asking it now, it's probably going to have a bit more context.
Yeah. Based off what was just reading in my browser, does Arcjet Shield support the OWASP core rule set? Huh. Weirdly, it's not picking that up.
That is odd.
I picked everything else up, just not that.
I wonder whether Arcjet Shield is protecting itself against pieces.
I mean, it shouldn't do because we just capture screenshots. So if I can see it, I can get it. So weird. Okay, so it picked up some of it. Just for some reason, doesn't like the OWASP thing. Bizarre. Okay, but what we've added there, though, just by doing that shield, by literally just doing shield.
We've added protection for all of those in just out of the box.
And that's
so what I often say to people when they say, how can I use Arcjet? What's the easiest thing? It's just install it and add shield. And if you add that to every one of your endpoints, then that's a good base level protection. From there, you can then decide, well, do I want to do rate limiting per endpoint or per server-side rendered page, or do I want to put it across the whole application? So you can choose what to do after that point, but just adding shield is probably a good minimum. And again, it's free, so why not?
Okay, so how would I have different think about these windows? If I want to implement this as like a payment system, as in, depending on the user ID, I have a different max. This would be that bucket, wouldn't it? So there's configuration at the bucket level.
You don't necessarily need to the bucket. The bucket is good if you want to have different requests cost. Use cost in air quotes, cost a different number of tokens. If every request is the same, if you want 10 requests a minute for a guest and 100 requests a minute for an admin, then you can still use a fixed or a sliding window. But you just need to change the window and the max values depending on who's logged in.
So I'd add multiple fixed windows here, for example.
So what you'd actually do is, because this is defined as essentially a singleton at the top layer before the get function is even called, we have no context about the user at this point. So what you would do in this case is actually comment all of the fixed window stuff out, so you're only installing Shield. And then later on, what we can do is we can use the with rule method on Arcjet to add other rules in.
So with rule, and in here, I could then take this fixed window, for example, like that. And this would be, so, you know, if you sort of have, like, I don't know, let max equal 1, if user is prod, increase max to 100, for example. So I go if user ID ID equals 2, max equals 100. Whatever, and then I can set max equal to max, like that. So now if I go in here and go, my user ID is 6. Hello world. Too many requests. User ID 2.
Now this is still going to hit too many requests, because in this particular instance, because for some reason the characteristic bug, what's happening is once you are in the block list for whatever characteristic, and it seems like maybe the characteristics is still looking at IP address or something, I'm not sure. Once you're in the block list, it will take those 60 seconds for that to be removed. So even though your user ID has changed, currently you're still blocklisted. Now, in most situations, that's never going to be the case, because you would log in with user ID 6, I might log in with user ID 2. This can cause a little bit of a confusion in development scenarios like this.
Okay, so this could be why we're getting this issue here, is because we're coming from the same place.
So if we wait for that minute to time out, and if we have a look at the logs, we'll be able to know when that was, when the last rejection was. That was
last rejection, 11:57:56.
So when we see it turn over to 59, if you make another request from user 6, or from user 2, then it should start a new rate limiting window.
Hello world.
And that should be able to, there we go. So now we've got our multiples.
Yeah, cool. Nice. Okay, so that's how I would do it, is you would keep the same singleton with the base level configuration, and then use with rule to customize it on a short-term basis.
Totally. And what I would probably do, just from a code abstraction perspective, is that code that you currently have that defines Arcjet with Shield, is I would move that all into a library file, for example, /lib/arcjet.ts. And then I would import that into every endpoint that I wanted to protect, or into the middleware. So
wouldn't that be, because here we've got Shield mode live in middleware, so does this mean here that every request,
so this is currently, yes, so this is currently in the middleware, so that's fine. So we actually already had Shield installed, it's just we now specifically added to the route.
So even though I've got a new one, okay, so before it even hits this route, it'll hit the middleware first, run the Arcjet protect, which does the Shield. Now, then we go to the route, runs Arcjet protect again. So we don't need the Shield here as such, because we've already got that.
Don't necessarily need it there. The only thing is, if you look at the middleware.ts file, the Arcjet object that's instantiated in there is, it's scoped to that file. So when you get into the route TS file, that Arcjet instance doesn't exist anymore, which is why we have to redefine it. And this is more of a Next.js architecture thing. I would probably create a single file in /lib/arcjet.ts and define this code that you currently see there once. And then we can import that into the middleware, and we can import it into the route. And that way, because at the moment we're actually instantiating Arcjet twice, once in the middleware, once in the route. If we extract it into the library, we'd only be instantiating it once. We could reuse that. And in fact, the with rule, you could even delegate that, or you could refactor that into its own function so that you could call that from any route you wanted with some rules. And you could,
because in general, the majority of your API is going to have the same route limiting rules.
Exactly. So I would put all of that into one file called arcjet.ts as a library file. But for the purposes of this example, what we're looking at is perfectly workable. As we can see, it's working.
Yeah. Of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this code here, and then I'm going to save that to pieces, because that's the useful thing to know. Awesome. We're at 2 hours. I think this is a good point to wrap up. We've got some,
I guess,
bit of fun.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. Just going to drop another link in the chat for those who are wondering where to get pieces. If you don't have pieces already, drop a link to that in the chat. Obviously, you've seen pieces in use. It's a on-device AI coding assistant designed to be where you are. We have pieces in the browser. So if I go to like this Next.js reference, for example, if I want to save this snippet here, I can actually, from the browser, save it into pieces. I can ask questions used from a Copilot. In fact, if I bring up the pieces Copilot in here, go into the Copilot chats, you may recognize these chats from the conversations we were just having the desktop app. So we kind of get this continuation of conversations in the desktop app and in all of the environments that you're in, whether it's your IDE, your browser. Support a whole lot of different browsers and a whole different plugins. You know, in fact, where is our plugins? Let's bring up the plug. Oh, you know, doesn't matter where you are, web browser, IDE, VS Code, Visual Studio, JetBrains, Jupyter Lab, Sublime, NeoVim's coming soon, CLI, even Raycast, you've used that. Microsoft Teams, Obsidian, it's there whenever you need it, which is pretty cool. So yeah, link in the chat if you want to check out pieces. Currently free, supports all the LLMs of your choice. And then I'm going to drop in another link for Arcjet, which is the security tool we've been looking at. Check that out if you want the ability to very quickly add bot detection, rate limiting, email validation, attack protection, and soon data redaction to your APIs. So it's very cool.
And soon the Python SDK.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Yes, I'm definitely a Python person, so I'm looking forward to the Python SDK very much. Cool. Well, thank you, Ben. This has been fun. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Hope you've had an enjoyable live stream. Not sure when I'm going to be back. I'm going to mix up these live streams a bit with some office hours. So keep following pieces on the various different socials, and you'll see when the next one is. We'll let you know. With that, thanks everyone for watching. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.